Hello students, this is Miss Mashaba Mashala speaking to you. Welcome to yet another session of TMS3716. Today we'll be looking at Learning Unit 3. As I mentioned before, I have divided the different learning units into different parts. So this is part 2 of Learning Unit 3, and we'll be talking about the different reading modules. The modules that we'll talk about today, the first one will be the schema theory. That will be followed by the top-down approach to teaching reading, followed by the bottom-up approach, and lastly will be a combination of the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach, which is the interactive approach to teaching reading. So what we know about the schema theory is that the schema is an organized framework of knowledge. Each time you receive new knowledge, you relate it in your brain to what you already know. So that's why it's very important to do background knowledge work with your learners, so that if it's a text that you are going to read with them, already they can relate that to the background knowledge and even what they knew before the actual text. So like I just explained, it says in the schema theory that readers construct knowledge not only from their knowledge of language, but also from their knowledge of the world. And that simply means that if you tell someone, or if in this case, if you tell your learners about something they can relate to, a topic that they know, even if they don't know it very well, as long as they can relate to that topic, then they are able to read better or to understand the text better. I'll give a simple example. If you tell them about a mall, they've been to malls, they know what takes place in malls, they know there are shops, and when they get to read a text that maybe it's a story of what happens at a mall, in their heads, in their brains already, they have a picture of a mall. So it's easy for them to relate to that kind of a text. Again, what is said about schema is that it guides the process of new information and help comprehension. So if it's new information based on something they know, maybe the context that they understand well, they will then be able to comprehend it or understand it better. So when you do background knowledge activities with your learners, what you are doing there is you are activating a schema or a framework into which they will now fit in the new knowledge. When you tell them about this story or this event that took place in a mall, although they do not know the details of the current event, their knowledge of malls and what malls look like and what takes place there will help them, will go a long way into helping them understand the text that you are, or the event that you are currently detailing. We talk about two types of background knowledge needed. First, it's the content background knowledge. They need to know the content of the events, like I'm saying, the mall and what happens there. Then there's the rhetorical organization, how the words are presented to them, how the actual text now in word format is, or in lexical format is presented to them. That's why it's important also to build vocabulary skills with your learners. To understand this concept better, I have shared here in this presentation a video on schema theory, learning and comprehension. Go through it. It's 9 minutes and 9 seconds long, which I consider to not be too long. So it will help you understand schema theory better. So the next model we'll talk about is the top-down model, which is also known as the inside-out model or from whole to part model. And in this model, we use the reader's experience and what she or he already knows, so what they bring to the text. There's a quote from your module site that I would like to read at this point, which says that the top-down model suggests that readers begin to read by drawing on what they already know about the structure and the meaningful of language, the structure of stories and other genres or text types, and their knowledge of the world to predict the general meaning and specific weights in context. So if the text is on a topic that they already know something about, then they use that to infer meaning. And sometimes, even when they meet new vocabulary or new words, they're able to make out the meaning of those words because they have a general understanding of what the text is about. Again, what we know about the top-down model is that it's a broader view on reading, and this works well for learners' experience, which is involved in this kind of reading. And on the other hand, the disadvantage might be cross-cultural identifications, which may play a major role. So looking at the two last bullet points, if the text is on a topic that learners understand, then it helps with comprehension. But on the flip side, if the context of the text is based on something foreign, let's take a text from another country, for example, that might interfere with understanding, even in cases where learners understand all the words in the text. Just the fact that it's something that they cannot easily relate to gets into the way of comprehension. I'll give an example in other cultures. Well, I think we have adopted the practice a bit in our country as well. There's a celebration of the so-called Guy Fawkes, which is a day when people would dress up and do all those funny things. Because we don't have that kind of a day in our context, it might not be easy for learners to understand a text based on Guy Fawkes. But on the other hand, if you give them a text that talks about, say, Heritage Day, we celebrate Heritage Day in South Africa. So although they might not know some of the words in that text, because this is a practice that we do in our context, it's always easier to comprehend. The next model I'll talk about is the bottom-up model, which, according to Brown, 1998, describes reading as a process that starts with the learner's knowledge of first letters, then sounds or phonemes, and then words, and how the words are formed to make sentences. So in this model, we think first of sounds. Your learners need to know the different first letters and the sounds that those letters make, and then the words, though all those building up to making sentences. I'll give an example. In English, we know the letter F, for example. And we know sometimes sentence sounds like in the word phone. For us, phone sounds like it should begin with an F, but from learning to read, we have learned that the actual letters in that word are PH. So your learners need to be taught all that. Another way to refer to the bottom-up model is from part to whole, because like I just mentioned, you begin with letters, you go on to sounds, then words, and then sentences, and then will come the text after all that. So the reason why this is effective is that when during the foundation phase, when learners first come to school, they cannot read at all. So it will be important then to teach them first learners, the shapes of, letters, the shapes of those letters, the sounds that those letters make, and again, how they use those letters to form words. Again, like we've seen in the previous model, the bottom-up model also has some disadvantages. It doesn't serve any purpose when you use it for higher level learners, and because it doesn't take into account the reader's expectations. So it's we could say it's very basic. It also doesn't take into cognizance the context of the text, because it's based on memory learning. It's based on remembering mostly. Then a combination of the top-down and bottom-up model would be the integrative model. And in this model, the reader is now more involved in reading. The reader will use the knowledge of the theme. The subject theme is this a text that talks about events in the mall, their pre-experience of written words, the vocabulary. There will be stores, there will be restaurants, there will be maybe the escalator, all that vocabulary that relates to the context of a mall, maybe. Their reading and their own expectations to predict what comes next at each phase of the text. Because remember that reading is a very interactive exercise where when you are reading, a skilled reader, you tend to predict what's happening next. Sometimes it's not, your predictions don't come true, but as a skilled reader, you have that capability of predicting what might come next. So the other thing about the interactive model of reading is that it integrates communicative activities. So this we often refer to as reading the lines, reading between the lines, and reading beyond the lines. By reading the lines is obviously what you'd be reading at that specific moment in your text. Reading between the lines is some information is not given, but from your understanding of the context, you might be able to make inferences or to infer meaning. Beyond the text, it means that now, having read this text, you relate it to your knowledge of the world. If it's a moral story, for example, on how to live well with your fellow human beings in society, you read about this person who maybe doesn't work well with his or her fellow learners, then you are able to relate that to your own experience, to say, okay, my takeaway from this text is that communication is important. This is how you live with other people, and so on. And the most important thing about the interactive model is that it's realistic and enjoyable to all students, because as much as it teaches them how to read the actual text, it also teaches them how to relate the text with their everyday experiences. So to sum up our session today, I have included here a video that sums up all the reading models that we talked about. That is the schema theory, the schema model, the top-down model, the bottom-up model, as well as the interactive model. And on that note, thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Ke a leboga, ndo leboga.